Hi, and welcome to the third part of the Old Man Rambling series. If you haven't seen the other two, you probably should see the other two because they sort of follows directly on from that. And it's going to be a little bit of a strange one, this one. I've done this one later than I'd intended because I suddenly realised that the last one, I think a lot of people really liked. And there was sort of potentially wisdom in there that's not in this one. Really, all this series is just explaining why it is that I enjoy having an interest, at least one hobby that I can do seriously, competitively even, and why over quite a long time that has been World of Warcraft endgame raiding, the hard mode raiding, mythic raiding at the moment. So in this one, I'm really going to be talking about Warhammer, when I picked up Warhammer, how I picked up Warhammer, and what I was doing with that. And this was the thing that, for me, leaving on from last week, was there for me when the judo wasn't. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm in the background you've got there still my old Hero Quest games, the Hero Quest and Advanced Hero Quest. So I'm going to sort of go through those and explain a little bit of how I ended up getting into Warhammer Fantasy Battle.
And here is the first one, so Hero Quest. It's not the first version, you can sort of see it says Hero Quest Advanced Quest Edition. This is because when I got around to getting myself, sorry, there's dust. I haven't opened this for, over 20 years. Not that it's been where it's been for over 20 years, I've only been living here for 2.5 years, but still. You know, I got into Hero Quest because a friend had it, and we went to his house, we played it there. So it was a little bit later when I got my own version. So just checking that it's all still here actually. Let's just put that there for now. Oh my god, oh wow. You can see there's been some attempts at least under... What is this? This isn't even from here, this is a metal model. Some of these do not belong in here. These are ones I've obviously tried to supplement it with later. But these ones, I mean, they're all basically one piece, the stuff that it came with. But you can certainly see I've got... I think some of these might be Warhammer Quest models. But these were all part of them, because they were all over here on their own bases. There were none of the usual games. Anything that looks like this, like a Games Workshop model, is not an actual Hero Quest model. So this is the Games Master's screen. So they can hide the maps and what's supposed to be on those maps. There were expansions for it as well, which I had, but I don't have those anymore, as far as I can tell. This fella here is actually, I think, supposed to be Morcar, who, in the lore, for anyone's into the lore of Warhammer, was supposed to have been the first chosen of Chaos, who was supposed to bring the end times, but it didn't quite work out. That's who that's supposed to be depicting. That's oh wow, I don't have enough room for all this. I mean, this is what it was played on. There were furnishings. I can't really see. Maybe I've got bits missing, or maybe I've got bits spread around all the different games. Because, you would have doors to certain ones where you couldn't necessarily automatically access all these rooms. It would sort of lead you into places, the big doorways and things like that. And bits of furniture as laid out on the map, which you'd have to explore. You went around with your 4 characters, which we've got there. The Barbarian, Dwarf, Elf and Wizard. I mean, this game was to the Warhammer Fantasy Battle that I ended up playing years later, as Snakes and Ladders is to chess, really. Although there were decisions you could make, they didn't really have much impact, and they were largely random as well. I mean, you could talk about any sort of thing in Warhammer a little bit random, because of course, outcomes are determined by a roll of dice. But when you've got loads of dice, you can work out what on the balance of probability you're going to get, and you're not going to be far wrong most of the time. Luck doesn't vary that much most of the time. Whereas when you're rolling much fewer dice, then it has a much greater impact. But yeah, God, I haven't seen this stuff for ages. And so let's have a look what we had in here. So these are the monster cards. Chaos Warrior, Gargoyle. treasure cards. So treasure card could be gold or it could be a trap. I mean, it's just. I mean, this is just totally random. It's whatever one you draw, isn't it? There's no way of making a strategic decision where you think on the balance of probability it'll work out like this. So yeah, I mean, although you sort of had the illusion of making decisions, in reality there were no. You know, there was a limited choice of things you could do. It was fun, but it was the equivalent of snakes and ladders. It was the equivalent of just rolling your dice, pulling your cards. Oh, hello, that elastic band's perished. Oh well, it's all going back loose now. Rolling your dice, you know, pulling your cards, and there you go. You just have to see what happened. Now the next dusty old box, and I do mean dusty. Advanced Hero Quest. Now, I'm not really sure that this did great business. I didn't exactly get it when it first came out. I mean, this wasn't a case of, oh, I like Hero Quest, oh, this sounds even better, I'll get it. It was a freak accident, really. I'd found a tenner on the ground when I was out in town after doing judo. And I went to a store and lo and behold, this was on sale for £10. I thought, well, easy come, easy go. So I thought I got it, and unlike Hero Quest, it wasn't just, God knows what I'm going to find here, because I think most of it, I think it's probably spread between that and the Hero Quest box. Unlike Hero Quest though, this wasn't just set up on a board, there was a lot more. What the hell is that? Oh, I made myself little boxes, I don't even remember this. What you had were, you know, dungeons that you made, and you could, you know, it had a solo play version because you could procedurally generate the dungeon, as would be called now. I don't even remember how most of it was played. I can see random tokens here for things that happen. Some of them are saying ambush, escape, whatever. Can't actually see the rule book as well. Have I lost that? That could be in another box, or it could be lost. There's the room tiles here to occasionally open out into them. But yeah, the idea that, I mean, whether you were designing your own, so you could be the games master, like the dungeon master, and you could plan out your own map, or whether you were going to just, you know, just play it as players and not have a GM, because you could, there were rules for determining how the monsters would react as well in any given situation, so you didn't actually need a dungeon master. Unless you wanted to do something cunning, if it was like a quest that would require any sort of role-playing aspects to it, then you'd probably need one there. But, and I can't find the rulebook to show you this, but this game, more than Hero Quest, really is what led me directly into Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Were it not for this bizarre set of, I mean, there were several bizarre set of circumstances. One, the friend who had Hero Quest. I mean, it was not the sort of thing I was likely to have got myself. Two, you know, if I hadn't found that tenner, I wouldn't have bought this, because I would have thought, well, I'm not going to pay a tenner at the time. It would have been quite a bit of money for me. I was only like a teenager, mid-teens at that. I was hardly going to be buying, you know, an unknown game, even though it said Advanced Hero Quest, and I'd thought, well, the first one was good. You know, is no guarantee that this one would be. So, you know, if I hadn't have found that £10 and I hadn't have come across this, you know, if I just hadn't happened to wander into that store, or if that store didn't have it on sale for £10, if it had it on sale for £15, well, it's like, well, that's not £10, is it? So really bizarre. But when I got it, you can see here, perhaps, some Skaven, rat men. And those were in the book because it came with some mobs. It didn't come with any Skaven, or it did come with Skaven mobs, but just basic clan rats. But what I noted was, in the advanced rules in it, there were rules for different types of Skaven, like Jezzails and flamethrowers, like warp fire throwers as I know them now, poison wind globadier, stuff like this. And obviously, but all the models were all basically the same. They were all just clan rat models, and all identical, absolutely identical. But not long after getting it, and I tried it out for a bit, I was in a shopping centre, you know, with my mum and my sister, and the usual thing, I would get dragged to these things. They'd spend all day looking around. I would spend like an hour, and then get bored. So I went into a Games Workshop store there, and I was looking around, and I saw this Skaven army book. Now, these were rules for using Skaven in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which I didn't play and had no intention of playing, you know. But it also contained a lot of lore, which I found very interesting. And it was also interesting to be able to see some of the models that were shown in the advanced rules. You can see the difference with anyone who looks at Games Workshop stuff now. It's much more sort of gothic style. These were always very colourfully painted back in these days. But you've got things like the Warp Fire Thrower team, the Jezzail team. And when I saw this, I thought, oh, it's 2 models, you know, because obviously I'd just be able to use it as a single model, because all we got was clan rats there, you know, and other models in here as well. And I thought, oh, this might be quite interesting. And so, you know, I got to university, and in my second year, I had a lab partner, a fellow called David, and he was into, you know, a number of things, including Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And we got talking about it one time, because, you know, being lab partners, on our lab day, we used to go to lunch together, we'd go, you know, and we'd each talk about our various interests and stuff. And one day he was talking about Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And I was talking about the fact, you know, I had a book, you know, I'd played some Games Workshop games called Hero Quest and Advanced Hero Quest. I'm not sure I'd played Warhammer Quest. I think Warhammer Quest, was that out at the time? I don't think that was quite out at the time. It may have been. It was around about that time. But either way, I'd only played like the tabletop role-playing games, the dungeon delving games, not the fantasy battle games. Even though I had a book, but I was talking about, you know, how this Skaven and how I enjoyed the lore of them, things like that. But I didn't think that I would enjoy Warhammer Fantasy Battle. The main reason I didn't think I would enjoy it is because I felt that it was just too much. It seemed to me you just move, because I'd been in Games Workshop stores, I'd seen people play it. You're just moving units around and rolling a load of dice, and I thought, well, it's not very intimate, you know, it's not really sitting around a table with friends. It's just like one person off of the other side of the table to another, a bit more involved, not very relaxed, not, you know. But this guy at university said, well, he had a friend who had a Skaven army. And he says, well, would I at least like to just come along and try out a game? Because it's not like I'd have to buy any models or anything like that. You know, he already had them all. He'd pick out an army for me, he'd show me how to use it, and we could just have a bit of a game. And I did, and it was quite spectacular. And if it was any other army, I may not have had as much fun, because let's try and find some of these units. Because what the Skaven are particularly good at is they can be extremely destructive and do a lot of damage to the enemy. But it's traditionally very unreliable. You can just as easily, particularly back in this would have been 4th edition. And you could just as easily do loads of damage to your own army. And this unit here, the Skaven Doom Wheel, we had one of these in. And it was one of the first, when I started trying to get into it was one of the first models I bought, just because I had a lot of regard for it. And when I was planning my Skaven Age of Sigmar army, which I'll talk more about in the actual Age of Sigmar series, Warhammer series, you know, I really want to get a Doom Wheel in it, just because of, you know, my regard for it. Because it started off brilliantly. It was absolutely mowing through the enemy forces. And then it went haywire and started mowing through my own forces and basically lost me the battle, because it caused so much damage and panic in the centre of my lines that it caused most of the other units to run away. And that was just how it was there. Obviously, you know, you learn as you got better into it. I mean, this is the thing I say about Warhammer Fantasy Battle. When you've got loads more dice, you can sort of try and work out what on the balance of probability is the way to do it. You can learn about damage limitation, things like that. But at the time, I didn't understand anything about the tactics or anything, you know. So I was just, or you would learn now never to put a Doom Wheel in the centre of your lines, on the flank. But, that and a few other things as well. It wasn't the only thing that went wrong. The warp fire throwers, again, they could do a lot of damage, but they could also blow up in their own face, and again, that could, cause trouble. And it was such fun that I thought, I quite like this, and I started playing a few other games. I had my army book, so I was able to, get even work, look at the models this fellow had and start to look at my own. Look at the rules here, because it told you how many points everything was worth, and I could work out my own army lists, and I was able to start learning from there. Until, of course, I left university and lost contact with that fella. At that point, I had to start getting my own Warhammer models.
So I spent quite a lot of time just getting books. Sometimes I would get models as well, and if I'm honest, a little bit like I'm doing now, getting back into Warhammer. I got the books because I enjoyed reading. I like reading stuff anyway, so I wanted to read as much as I could about it. So generally speaking, I would pop out to town or a different city, wherever I'd be wandering around, visit the Games Workshop store, get another book, be reading up on that. But and also some models. These would be nice. I get some of these. And sometimes you do, and I think this is not uncommon for Warhammer players. You get eyes bigger than your stomach. You get more models than you're really going to get, and you'd end up with a huge stack of models that are unpainted, unassembled, and sometimes you can have those for years. Like, I've got that situation at the moment. I was going to order some more this weekend, for example, and I just thought myself, you've got loads of models you already haven't painted, stop it. So I haven't. And so I started moving that, and I was getting other friends into it as well. So there were friends who were take it around to theirs or whatever, and we'd just have small games to begin with. Start off with small battles, and build up from there. And then another, what was called 6th edition came out, and as I say, by this is the point where it sort of left off from last week, because by this point, I was having more time. I was on top of the teacher, and I was working at a place where I sort of enjoyed it a lot more as well, and I was getting myself into a bit of a groove, and I was sort of getting to more serious. I was going to the convention now, this Games Day thing in Birmingham, so I would be going down to there, and I was starting to get into going to tournaments. They have this thing called Grand Tournaments. I noticed they have something. Well, they have a Grand Tournament for 40k still, but they have something. Forgotten what it's called now. It was one quite soon for Age of Sigmar. But they had grand tournaments for Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Now, traditionally, this was just a once-a-year thing, and it's a big 2,000 point side game. This was like the standard. You can play smaller games, you can play larger games, but larger games were technically much longer. They were far rarer. But most games that you'd go to play at Games Workshop store would be smaller games, so they didn't take as long. But it was like the gold standard 2,000 point games that I really want to get, and the tournament seemed like a good way to do that. But when 6th edition came out, they decided to change the format a little bit, which is quite encouraging, because there was so much demand for them. So rather than just put on one grand tournament, they put on heats. So there were 2 heats, and the top 50% of those then went into the grand tournament final. So it was effectively like you could do from my point of view, I was just thinking, great, that means 2 tournaments a year. So I went along to my first one of those, and I loved it, and you had it was very enjoyable playing 2,000 point games as well, which is how I always felt it was meant to be. And I started to just get much more and more into it, and I think every day I would be doing something. It was on a much more casual basis than Warhammer Fantasy Battle. There was no day where I had to do a thing. Twice a year there would be the grand tournament, one with the heats and one with the finals, and that was a weekend where you would go down. Well, I'd go down to Nottingham, which is like an hour and a half's drive away, or at the time actually I lived somewhere slightly different, but about the same. It wouldn't have been much different. So okay, you were sort of committing to that a little bit, but other than that, I could come. If I didn't want to go down to the club and play some games one week, well, I didn't. Although it wasn't usually because I didn't want to, it was usually because of something else on. But if I was busy at work, I never got the thing which I do now with World of Warcraft, where it's like, work's really busy and it's full on here, and it's like conflicted. Obviously work always has to take precedence, but it's a bit conflicted there. That never happened. It just sort of, it moved as you were. It was much more flexible. as a hobby, as the other hobbies up to that point had been. And but as well as the tournaments, the internet started to become much more of a thing as well. Now, I didn't make regular use of the internet until I went to university. We didn't have it at home. It was sort of at school, but very rarely got to use it. So the first time I got to use the internet on a regular basis was at university. And then when I'd finished university, obviously I started working, and then I moved out from home, and I moved out on my own for my second teaching job, which was a hell of a lot better than my first one. My first one was a nightmare. Gordon Bennett, I still have nightmares about it. But the second one was much nicer, up to a point. I got my own place, got my own internet connection. It was dial-up at the time. But nonetheless, what it meant was that I had access to the internet, and I was able to produce a website. And I did. I produced my own sort of, Warhammer-themed website, which started to do quite well because I was putting things on it, and then eventually broadband did come out, and it got even better then, that didn't really exist anywhere. I was doing battle reports. I'd create graphics for them to show each turn and the units moving, and I would write battle reports. Those were quite well. Games Workshop themselves had a forum. They produced a forum where there's a lot of discussion on, and then they suddenly stopped it for some reason. I forget why. They had an issue with it. I don't know what it was. And so that was a shame. But, I still carried on with that. Because in White Dwarf, the monthly magazine, occasionally there would be battle reports in there, but it wasn't every month, and even if it was, it'd be like one. So I was sort of providing something that didn't really exist to any great extent elsewhere. And I remember towards the end, just before I stopped, as I was also doing this like special character competition where I was having special characters fight against each other, and I was doing like an arena of blood type thing for the special characters. And that was at the point at which I got into World of Warcraft, and it sort of stopped. So I was like building up a bit of a community really there, which it'd be interesting to see where that would have gone if I'd have carried it on. But I didn't. It just stopped at a certain point. But yeah, this is sort of why I'm wanting to get back into Warhammer, because what I much prefer playing games of Warhammer across the table with an actual person than on a computer. On a computer game, you meet far more people, and in something like World of Warcraft, you learn a lot more about the world as well, because these people are in different countries as well. You get different cultural perspectives on things. It broadens your horizons much more. And it's better than travelling, really. People talk about, travelling broadens their horizons. Doesn't really if all you do is go to the tourist traps, does it? You don't learn anything other than this country is hot, this country is cold, in this country it rained quite a lot. And you don't learn a lot, whereas when you're talking to actual people, then you do. So there is that side to it, and you sort of see a lot more people, a lot more active community, just by its nature. But nothing really beats an actual proper game with something physical. For me, anyway, a lot better than the digital one. But the reason why, and I've said this before, World of Warcraft ended up appealing much more was because it was all the time. With Warhammer Fantasy Battle, most of my time would be spent planning armies, which I loved, I enjoyed, and I will still enjoy again. That appeals. But ultimately, what you're playing the army for is to play a game. But most of the games I would play would be 1,000 point or 1,500 point. You'd go down every Thursday to the Grimsby Games Workshop store, and you might get a 1,000 point game, or there might be a bit of a campaign going on with small, like a skirmish game or something like that. And that was all very enjoyable. I still enjoyed that. But it was like the hors d'oeuvres. It wasn't the main course. The main course was the 2,000 point games, and the only way you got those was occasionally, I'd get people around my house and we'd have 2,000 point games there, from which I, used to try and do the battle reports or the grand tournaments themselves. But it wasn't even once a week. I wouldn't even get what I was wanting to do once a week. So, and then I was playing a bit of 40k as well, because then that seemed to be more popular and much more likely to get games of 40k as well. So I learned a bit of that. But I didn't enjoy it as much as Fantasy Battle. And the other thing is, with 40k, I always sort of say this, I never seem to enjoy sci-fi games as much as fantasy games. And the issue with it as well is there are some armies I enjoy for 40k, and I could absolutely play it. And I'll learn to play it again. In fact, I've just sent off for something called Kill Team, which is Sounds to me like more time for 40k. But that sounds like a good way to get back into 40k to begin with and then go from there. But I will never get into it as much as fantasy, and the reason is this. There are armies I will enjoy playing 40k, but there are a whole host of armies which I have no interest. Well, that's fine, you might say, but to be really effective and to play a game competitively, you need to know about your opponent's strengths and weaknesses. Which means, and what I used to do for Fantasy Battle and what I will also do for Age of Sigmar, is reading not only the stuff on the armies you want to play yourself, but on all the others to get a good overall knowledge of everything. That won't happen with 40k because I won't be interested in lots of them. I won't want to read about them. I might learn some things as I play against opponents that play those armies, but that's it. I won't ever be able to, like I was talking last week, go back and accelerate my learning by reading extra myself because I won't have that interest. So it will always just be as a little side issue where I will never really become a good player of it as a result of that. So what Warhammer at the end of it just sort of conclude, sort of gave me, it gave me something that on a very casual basis I could do something fruitful for, because even on a day when I wasn't playing it, I'd be able to plan out some armies or read up on some lore or something like that, which is always very good. Just as a contrast, actually, with the lore, because a lot of lore books, and just like with World of Warcraft. I will give World of Warcraft and Blizzard in general the nod here. They get better authors to do them. I'm not saying the stories are better, but they're better written, just from a technical point of view. They get actual proper authors. The thing with the Games Workshop ones, I've just been reading, for example, the End Times, because I'm, well out of the loop. So the End Times is basically the 5 books that end the Warhammer Fantasy Battle era and move into the Age of Sigmar era. And they were enjoyable stories. I enjoyed reading them. But just as I had done with all the other Warhammer Fantasy books I still have and had read in the past, in particular the Gotrek and Felix series, which I enjoyed but had the same problem, the author just wasn't technically good. And it's a bit like, when you're watching, sometimes you go and watch a play, and sometimes it's a spectacularly professional production, you're having a good time, it's brilliant. And then sometimes you go to a play, and it's a bit more amateur, and every now and then you just get jarred because you're very aware you're watching a play. It's the same thing with these books. Every now and then they'll do something, or they'll use a clumsy metaphor, or they'll keep using the same metaphor all the way through for different situations. And it'll just get jarring. It's like, you've done this before, stop it. And it just pulls you out of your immersion there. So unfortunately, it's quite a bit like that. They don't really get professional authors. They tend to get people who have written some fan fiction or have been game designers themselves. And I suppose if they don't sell as many, it's maybe not as worthwhile getting best-selling authors to do it. I don't know. But that is a different set. But nonetheless, I could read the books and I used to enjoy, because the stories would be good. They just wouldn't be well told. So you could do some of that. And then every now and then, at least once a week, you'd get some sort of game in as well. So it was good from a casual point of view, from that point of view. And then, as I say, developing the website, I enjoyed that a lot. I thought it was fantastic. Nowadays, of course, it would be YouTube. I would enjoy doing the stuff for YouTube, and that's what I'm hoping to be able to do as well once I settle into it. I've also noted that there's tournaments, my aim, I suppose, longish term, would be to get ready for the tournaments next year, to actually play in the tournaments next year. Where, again, I don't know whether there's heats and finals type thing. I'll have to look into that. But there seems to be tournaments held at Games Workshops at Warhammer World, their headquarters. It's called something different. It's not called Grand Tournament. It's called something different. I've forgotten what. But it is 2,000 point aside games. So, yes, I will be very much aiming to get myself ready for that and to go to that next year. So that'll be interesting. That'll be fun. I'll have to then find hotels as well, because another issue I had was stopover there. The first time I went to the Grand Tournaments, I got a hotel. It was near the cricket ground, actually. It was a bit of a walk from Warhammer World, but it was okay. Didn't mind walking so much then. but it wasn't great for the parking, because that's always the key thing for me. I want a hotel where there's proper parking, because sometimes you'll get a hotel that'll say there's parking, but there's a bit of competition for it. There isn't as many, there aren't as many parking spaces as there are rooms at the hotel. So it's a bit like first come first serve, and then it's like, oh, you've got to try and find someone else. So it's a case of, I don't mind paying extra for that, because that's the most important thing to me. The rest of the stuff with the hotel, it's just a room to rest my head. I don't need anything else. I don't even care if it serves meals or anything like that. I just need dry bed and a parking space. That's it. But one year, so the first one wasn't too good, and then one year, because I wasn't finding very good hotels that were near it, the first hotel, now that I think about it, it didn't have parking at all, so I got the train down. I was trying to think to myself, why did I walk to Warhammer World? That was why. It's because I didn't take the car. I took the train because it didn't have parking. And then I found one with parking, which wasn't very good. It was very competitive for the parking spot. And then on one time, I decided I wasn't going to stay over at all. I was going to drive down there and then not come all the way back home, but someone who lived halfway between where I live and Warhammer World, or roughly there, stuff over there. That turned out to be a very bad idea, because that was my most competitive grand tournament. After there were 6 games, 3 games on the Saturday, 3 on the Sunday, and the 3 games on the Saturday blew everyone away. Maximum points on all of them. So on the second day, I started off on what was called the top table, because there were only 3 people that had scored maximum points. So I was on the top table, because at that time I was joint equal with someone else. We played against each other. And I lost very badly. But it was due to a tactical howler, a spectacular howler, that I put down to, of course, who knows, maybe I was just stupid, but I put down to the fact that what had happened was, on the first day, at one point, my dragon's header fell off. I hadn't put a large enough pin in, it was metal dragon, so it fell off. So I had to do some repair work. But because I not to get a hotel, but to go to this friend's house, went to this friend's house, and I was pinning that. So there was a drive to get there. Then I went to bed, didn't get enough sleep because I had to drive back the next day, and it was still a significant drive away. So I put it down to tiredness, which, was disappointing. So after that, I always definitely got a hotel, but I never did as well again either. I always did well enough to qualify for the heats to get to the finals. That was always fine, because there were some spectacularly bad players there, like with anything. But I never got near the top table again. But, so that's the other thing I would have to do. I'd have to really scope out hotels, find a hotel without having to go to a 5-star, really ultra posh hotel. Obviously, I'm not doing that. But nonetheless, to find somewhere that's got parking, good parking, no trying to squeeze it in to a space that's clearly too small, or a car park itself that's awkward to get around. Just one that's nice and easy. I want as little stress as possible when it comes to parking. Just a hotel that does that. And I shall look forward to that. That'll be my end term, looking forward to it. What will be disappointing is if by that time I've managed to be able to do some regular battle reports on the channel and things like that, which is what I've been hoping for. A disappointment might be that I may not be able to do it on those ones, because I was reading through some of the rules for these. It's like, you're not allowed to take photos. It's like, oh, that's disappointing. But anyway, there we go. So, that's at the point at which I sort of ended it there, because what happened is World of Warcraft came out, and there was a period of time when I was doing both. It was perfectly possible to do both, because obviously when I started World of Warcraft, I wasn't starting doing serious raiding or anything like that. That came later. But that's the point I'm going to pick it up with next week, because next week is going to be very much about how I got into World of Warcraft and my early time in World of Warcraft and what that gave to me and how that changed the pattern of my life. So I hope you enjoyed this video. There wasn't the wisdom in it that you may have found in the last one. I'm sorry for that, but I hope you still found it entertaining anyway. If you did, don't forget to like, comments down below. That's always good to read. And until next time, I'll see you later.